Welcome back to the channel. Thank y'all for hanging with me on this Tuesday. So a jig is one of my favorite baits. I talk a lot about it, and there's certain times of the year where it is always going to be a player. Pre-spawn, the fall, anytime you have water that is cooler or days that are shorter, I just feel like a jig is one of those baits that is going to catch the biggest fish on the lake. I don't always use it to catch a bunch of fish, but when I need a bigger than average bite, I turn to the jig. Now, why I think this is such a major player in those times of the year, not only are the crayfish probably spawning or just prevalent, but you also have to assume that the average amount of bites you're going to get on this bait is bigger than your normal creature bait, any soft plastic you're going to drag on the back of a Texas rig. You're going to have to catch probably twice as many on those to equal the size you're going to get with the jig. But you'll also find that this is a bait that those bass can find better. So this has a lot more drawing power. There's nothing worse in fishing than making the correct decision on where to go, getting there, using the correct bait to catch the fish, and the fish not know your bait is in its strike zone. So for that reason, the jig is a really big player when you have very aggressive fish. So when I think of very aggressive fish, I think of the pre-spawn. Cool water, they have no choice but to feed up and get ready for the spawn. So they are going to eat everything they can find, and that's why so many baits work so well that time of year. You also will find that once those fish get into the spawn, the post-spawn, they've now been fished for all spring long, they start to get off of the jig. So I'm not a big fan of a jig during the spawn, unless you're fishing around rocky highland reservoirs where it's just hard to keep a bait in the strike zone. I never use a jig after the pre-spawn. But when I do really turn to that jig is when I'm getting a lot of bites on the Texas rig. This sometimes happens in the post-spawn where I'm catching a ton of fish and I need something to get rid of all those small fish. I turn to the jig. So it's always going to be a bait. When I'm getting a lot of bites, I'm going to try it because I typically need to cancel out a lot of those smaller fish, and that's what a jig typically does. Now, what I will say, though, is once we get further along into the summer months, we are now out of, that late spring post-spawn period, and we're moving further along. I will not throw a black and blue jig at all. So when I look at the spectrum on what's going to get the biggest fish, the most bites, and the fishing being the best, the black and blue jig. If we have the best fishing, I'm going black and blue because I know if I put this bait anywhere near a bass, they're going to eat it. But once we get past the post-spawn, we're no longer in the best fishing times of the year. So for me to use a jig in the post-spawn, it's going to be a natural color. And there's a few different colors that I really like. That Missouri craw is a really good color. Your dark green pumpkin with a little bit of maroon is a really good color. And any natural brim imitators, your green pumpkins, a little bit of chartreuse, green pumpkin orange, those are all going to be what I use. I rarely have caught anything on a black and blue jig past springtime. So even once we get into the fall, you really want to go with your bluegill imitators. You really want to go with your crawfish imitators, and you can't beat those with your green pumpkins, your green pumpkin orange, chartreuse, and even your Missouri craws. If you haven't tried that color, check that out. It's kind of got a broken up crawfish pattern. It's a really good natural clear water color. So when I am going to be using a jig past the good fishing times of the year, which I always think of spring being the best fishing time of the year, it's never going to be black and blue. And even in really dirty water situations, I'm typically not going to be using a black and blue jig. It's going to be a black and blue creature bait or something where I can get more bites, because this just isn't going to get you enough bites. This in a really natural color into June and July can still get you enough bites, but you really need not only good fishing conditions, but you also need perfect situations like water being in the bushes, the bluegill being in the bushes, and then enough water clarity where those fish can chase your bait. 2 feet of visibility is great jig fishing visibility because you need those fish not to just have that bait drop down their nose, but to actually swim and chase it a little bit, and then the jig will still work. So Black and blue, probably my favorite color when that water's below 60 earlier in the years, but once we get past springtime, it's always a natural color. Try that, guys. If you want to catch fish on a jig later in the year, good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.